Well, welcome to the United Debate Show. So, United still on for all the trophies they could enter, having beaten Derby County in the 5th round of the FA Cup. They've now been drawn away to either Swansea or Fulham in the quarter-finals. It's back to league action this week. The game in hand against Fulham and then another one against Blackburn Rovers, and a chance to really get some daylight between themselves and Liverpool and Chelsea. Well, joining me to discuss all the issues, and plenty of them as ever to discuss, former United and Ireland striker Frank Stapleton and Radio Manchester's Steve Wyeth. Gentlemen, you're both very welcome to the show. Steve, you were at the game yesterday afternoon and it seemed a commanding performance. Was that how you viewed it?
Very much so. Probably the best we've seen from United in recent weeks, even though they've stolen a march to the top of the Premier League title. Some of the football was sort of the United we saw towards the end of last season. You expect them to hit their straps, don't you, after Christmas and New Year. Hadn't quite happened until yesterday. Even that 5-0 thumping at West Brom a couple of weeks ago. Yesterday, some really, really good football. They controlled the game. Well worth the 4-1 victory, definitely.
And, of course, a side that contained the likes of Darren Gibson given an opportunity. I mean, it was a side that was quite fresh, really, in terms of personnel.
I think it isn't so much about freshness, it's about the confidence within the whole squad. And whoever plays just goes into a situation knowing exactly what they need to do. It's how other teams stop them is the big problem for everybody. But certainly at the moment, everything is flying. And you just wonder, is it possible at the end of the season, if they're still in everything, that little bit of fatigue might come in, but it just doesn't look like it at the moment. The manager's, the way he's shuffling the pack and bringing different players in, and time again, he's getting the mixture right. So, sometimes you look at it and say, oh, that's a funny team to pick. He did it against Chelsea when he played Fletcher in midfield, and everybody said, well, and Ryan Giggs, and they said, well, this isn't going to work. They're going to get blown away by Chelsea. They totally dominated them. So he's getting that right more and more often now, to the point where people don't question it anymore. At one time, the press more than anybody used to question it. They used to ask, well, why has he put that team out? That doesn't look like the team that's going to go out there and win that particular game. And it's just happening now. Every single team he picks seems to be right on the mark. Of course, he has the benefit of working with the players day in, day out.
And of course, you mentioned different teams, and we've spoken about this on the show before, but he's got different sort of opposition, different challenges, obviously different competitions as well. It's that ability to keep picking the right team that's made him the best manager that this country has seen for many, many years. And
he's been particularly clever this season. I mean, Frank just alluded to the Chelsea game, but in picking and choosing when he plays the likes of Paul Scholes, Ryan Giggs and Gary Neville, so far it's just worked perfectly for him. I mean, you have to doff your cap. I mean, Frank mentioned that occasionally there's a few raised eyebrows when the team sheet lands 45 minutes or so before kick-off, but we're going to have to stop raising those eyebrows because he, more often than not, he's getting it right. And I suppose the concern for their rivals in the 4 competitions they're still involved in is he was able to make 7 changes for that game against Derby, and yet there seemed to be no disruption to the way they play their football. And I bet Gus Hiddink, Rafael Benitez, Arsene Wenger, Martin O'Neill would love to have not only the problems, but that ability to make changes every week and just take one peg out and put another one in, and it has absolutely no disruption to the rhythm.
That's the beauty of being the same manager for such a long time. You've the time to keep bringing in the players gradually that you feel almost a year, 2, 3 years down the line, can't you?
Well, yeah, I think it's very much in the context of what happened last week with Chelsea and the manager going and having the only son man, and Tony Adams for that matter. I think that you look at the longevity, any of the clubs that have patience, and because say Manchester United didn't win a trophy in one particular year, they didn't press the panic button. They just continued on and let the manager get on with the job. All right, it's a success story because the Manchester United is a huge club, and it does. No matter what's happening, they always generate a lot of money, but they also generate a lot of interest. So they're always at the forefront of the papers. But what's happened here is that the football side of it is left to the football people. There's no interference from. I'm saying interference from directors, but directors see that in the long term, if the manager gets it wrong, he gets it wrong. If he gets it right, he gets it right. But you've got to have that same sort of consistency with how their approach is to it. That they don't all of a sudden think, oh, this has gone wrong, and then start to try and make changes from above, which then causes problems within the club if they let him get on with it. And as long as they're successful, all right, you would say that if they went through a horrendous time, they still wouldn't sack him. I think that it's just one of those situations where you've got to leave it, to let the manager, he knows better. The problem is when directors think that they know more, that's a huge problem.
Yeah, and of course the fascinating thing with Sir Alex is he seems to sort of identify a problem before it happens, you know, almost predicting that it's going to occur. I remember when sort of Vidic and Evra arrived a couple of transfer windows ago in January, and there was this feeling of, gosh, who are these people, and, you know, where will they fit in? And he sees it in advance of everybody else, doesn't he?
Well, he's stopped really making big moves in the transfer market in January, and you almost think for that reason he prefers to start the season with a settled squad and go with that squad he's got. And because they've managed to build that squad over time, you mentioned about how long he's been there. That's not a luxury that other clubs have, because as managers come and go so frequently, players come and go with them, whereas Alex Ferguson has been able to build his squad. He's rebuilt it 2 or 3 times during his tenure, hasn't he? But this squad he's got now has been 4 or 5 years in the making, so it doesn't need too much tinkering in terms of additions. It just needs him to know, and he seems to know perfectly well, which players can interchange with each other.
He's almost got 3 generations in the team.
Absolutely.
You know, when you look at it, we know who the experienced players are, and the ones in the middle who've still got a career still in the middle of their career, and then you've got the ones coming up. And what's happening, I think what's been great, is that normally you would look at a situation where the clubs are blooding the players in the Carling Cup, and then they're maybe giving them a little run out in the FA Cup with more of a blend of experience. This year it's not. The players have had to come into league matches where there's vital points, but the manager's had the belief in them, knows what they can do. They come into a team. Basically, if you come into the United team, you do what the guy who you're replacing does, and you try and do it better. If you do it better, you stay in the team. If you don't, well, then you wait for your chance the next time. And it's as I say, the generation thing has happened, and it hasn't just happened. It's been thought out, and then year on year, somebody's replaced. You see, you talked about Evra, you talked about Vidic. That came in January, and in the manager's mind, I'm sure the idea was 6 months. Give them the 6 months. Let them have a feel of it. Like Tosic is here now, and the other boys is staying over in Serbia. But he will be here, and he's had a run out already, which is amazing, because you would have thought, he maybe just wait, let him get a feel for what's going on, and all of a sudden he's had a little touch. But Evra and Vidic were thrown in straight away because of circumstances. And within the 6 months, all right, people were having doubts, but because in the manager's mind, he said, well, it doesn't matter what these players do. If they play well, great, it's a bonus. If they don't do as well, we'll put it down to adjustment. But when the new season starts. But they had a little bit of it, and all of a sudden, when the new season starts, United went on and won the league that year.
And I mean, all this time, let's go to Stamford Bridge. The great rivals to United, who'd taken the title from United for a couple of seasons. And, you know, Jose Mourinho goes in sort of September of the season after they'd won those 2 cups, and then another manager comes in, and then another manager, and now they're on a temporary manager. It's no surprise, is it, to see Chelsea falling away while United continue at that level?
I can't understand why more owners and chairmen don't look at United and Arsenal. You look at the job that Arsene Wenger's done over a prolonged period of time and see that is evidently the model which brings success. I mean, you wonder whether, I'm sure Roman Abramovich isn't the sort to have too many regrets in his life, but allowing Jose Mourinho to leave, getting rid of Jose Mourinho, that's backfired on him a little bit. And good luck to who's hitting. You know, let's see what he can do. It will be interesting for the final weeks of the season to see whether he can galvanise what is evidently a talented group of players. But stability, both at the top and the bottom of the Premier League, throughout league football, seems to be the key, and it amazes me that the hire and fire them attitude remains. And Martin O'Neill is probably the next one where it'll be interesting to see whether if he's still at Aston Villa in 5, 6, 7 years' time, just how much stronger they will be as a consequence of that.
I think that they sack managers because they can afford to, not for any other reason, all right, for a reason that the results are maybe not going well. But if they couldn't afford to do it, they'd have to stick with it. And this is the crux of the whole thing, is that there's a huge amount of money in the Premier League every year, as we know, the sponsorships and everything. It's in a recession, things are still the same in football. But the clubs, and you look at it, disgusting really the amount of money that they've had to pay out for their managers, because it has to be instant. You see, the mentality is, and you touched on Arsenal the same, the mentality is you don't always have to, the expectation is that you should win things, but you don't always have to, if they don't win, they haven't won for 2 or 3 years now, Arsenal. I mean, there has been suggestions in the press, but that's the only place. I was at the Emirates on Tuesday for the international match, and there wouldn't even be a thought there that Arsene Wenger was under pressure at all, because that place wouldn't be even there if it wasn't for Wenger and his foresight, the training ground and the facilities. They've got a 60,000-seater stadium now, where we're at Highbury at 34,000, 36,000 when stretched, and of course falling behind all the time. And his intuition and foresight to do what he's doing with the club. It doesn't matter if they were to be fighting a relegation battle. There's no way that I'd say that they'd ever press the panic button and say, well, we've got to look for somebody else, because nobody's doing for the club what he has done, and that even takes in Herbert Chapman in the 30s.
And of course there is that little subplot developing, which we'll go on to in the second part, with Jose Mourinho sort of preparing for United already. I mean, we've seen him watch 2 or 3 United games already. Inter are, I think, 9 points clear now at the top of their Serie A, and United looming in a couple of weeks, which we'll come on to in the second part. Guys, I'll just start it for the minute because we've got to go to a break, but our guys in great form, as usual, plenty of issues to discuss. Do join us after the break for part 2 of the United Debate Show. Welcome back to part 2 of the United Debate Show, alongside me, former United and Ireland striker Frank Stapleton and Radio Manchester's Steve Wyeth. Gents, before the break we were talking about the continuity of the likes of Arsene Wenger and Sir Alex Ferguson, and the fact that Jose Mourinho is no longer at Chelsea, but of course he's now Inter Milan, and albeit there are 2 Premier League games and important ones at that, there is that little subplot developing with Jose Mourinho, isn't there? And that Inter Milan tie in the Champions League is looming large.
Tasty one, isn't it? Really looking forward to that. It couldn't have fallen better, really. Fergie against Mourinho again, and Mourinho will probably feel, with what he did with Porto and Chelsea against United, that he's just got a slight advantage over Alex Ferguson, so he'll be keen to maintain that. I managed to catch the last 10 minutes or so of the Milan derby when we got back from Derby County, and by all accounts it was a good performance. It was a good game, and almost in terms of the attacking football on offer was slightly not quite what you'd have expected from an Italian match. So maybe Inter are better prepared for United than we might expect. You look at their squad, you look at the players that were in that team for the Milan derby, doesn't necessarily fill you with dread in terms of comparing like for like with what Manchester United have got at their disposal. But Mourinho just seems to know how to beat Ferguson's team, doesn't he? And that is going to be one heck of a test for United. If they are going to win all 4 trophies, then getting past Inter in the last 16 of the Champions League will be the real test of that possibility, I think.
Will that be in the back of Sir Alex's mind over the selection for the games against Fulham and Blackburn Rovers?
Certainly the Blackburn Rovers match, I would say. Fulham's just almost a week away, so he'll... I think what he'll do is preparation for that particular match will come into his mind in terms of who he plays in that first Fulham match. The Saturday match will be very, very important, always the game before. Anybody that's in any doubt, he will take out, as he always does. If there's any doubts about injuries, we're always recalling how when we played in our day, that if you were 95% fit, they'd give you a little bit of a test before the game, and how do you feel? And you would make the decision. You say, I feel a little bit, but it feels okay. It's only right, off you go, you're in. If you say that these days, there's not even a chance of you playing. They say, no, you're out of it. You're completely... We want you 100%. And there is the benefit in the long term. And I think even Alex Ferguson now, I saw him quoted the other week, he was doing a press conference before one of the Premier League matches, and they said about... he said he leaves it to the medical staff. He said, I trust them. And what they say, I'll go with it. They have more... Where years ago, that wouldn't have been right. The manager would say whether he were fit or not. So in this respect, I think the preparation for the game with Inter Milan will be based on what all the medical staff do and how people who are coming back, how they're up to scratch in terms of fitness. Go back to Mourinho, of course, he's a huge personality, and when he was at Chelsea, obviously Porto as well, there's a physicality about his teams, and I don't think it'll be any different. Like you will look at this game coming up, the centre forwards. You've got 2 big centre forwards, Adriano and The other one,
Ibrahimovic.
Yeah, but I'm glad you said it.
Yeah, I could see you working towards it.
Yeah. And you've got two big guys playing up front, and he sees this game as two games. Not this game, but this tie is 2 games. And what he will do, we will only look at the results. He won't look at what's in between, whether it's pretty or not. He'll look at it as as having that winning mentality, and that's what he did with Chelsea. Because of his personality, and he's not quite as a favourite in Milan with the press as he was here, but certainly because of the force of his personality, he makes things happen, and the players like him. So he's halfway there with that, and I think this is a huge game. This is the hardest game United are going to have, I think, through to the end of the season. If they get through, and I agree with you 100%, this is going to be the toughest game because they're top of their league, and these are not one-off, but they're 2-off games.
Aren't they?
Yeah, they have to. He's got a little bit of a. He can mess around with the squad at the weekend. He can take out, and that's what he will do because he's focused on this game. He knows that they can afford to lose a game in the Italian league, especially after last night's result. So I just think that we have a huge game coming on, and the fact that it's the last 16. You know, you would have thought a semi-final of the Champions League would have been great. It's the last 16, and someone said to me the way, I don't know whether it's right now, but that the previous holders of the Champions League have never got past the last 16.
That's a stat.
I don't know how true it is, but someone said that the next season, when they've been defending it, they haven't been able to get past.
Gosh, there's a stat to conjure with. Of course, I know no team's ever defended the Champions League. That's a fact. And let's go back to the Premier League fixtures, Fulham and Blackburn. These are significant fixtures in United, putting a huge gap because, of course, Liverpool don't play until after United have played those 2 matches. I mean, these are 2 big games for United in terms of making the Premier League a safer bet for them than it would be prior to these 2 matches.
I think when United got back from Japan, from winning the Club World Cup, Alex Ferguson would have sat down and thought, right, with this 2 months now before the resumption of the Champions League, we have to go on a run in the Premier League. We have to be top of the Premier League going back into the resumption of the... Maybe not top, but certainly there or thereabouts. They cannot possibly have hoped in their wildest dreams how quickly it would have turned around and how Liverpool and Chelsea would have fallen away a little bit. But they would have seen January and February as being absolutely crucial. You probably normally look at April and May as being a crucial stage in the Premier League campaign. But knowing that they had the resumption of the Champions League and the intensity of the game is going to be against Inter Milan, that they needed to go on the sort of run that they've gone on. So he won't want that to end going into these games against Fulham and Blackburn. Blackburn on Saturday at 5:30 is the end of that run before the resumption of the Champions League. And as you say, he'll settle for 2 more 1-0s. I know it's not quite the United way, all these 1-0 victories. It's more of a thing that linked with Arsenal back in the 80s and 90s, isn't it? But that, as far as he's concerned, that run will end on Saturday night once the Blackburn game's out of the way. And if he's got 2 more 1-0 victories under his belt, he'll be absolutely delighted.
I think the fact that they picked it up very quickly when they came back from Japan, that was a long trip. I think it was very evident at Stoke when the next game when they came back that, you know, that's great true. I mean, that's not the game you really want. A real physical game against a team that play very direct football, but they managed to squeeze that one out, and then the next one was a little bit better. But ever since then, they've got momentum. They've taken a role, and the young players have come in. He's managed to be able to rest the players you spoke about before. He spoke the likes of Giggs and Scholes and Gary Neville. They've been rested, and there's been other players being rested. And all of a sudden, he's juggled it around, and it's almost, you couldn't have probably... Because sometimes it isn't... for all his experience, you do what you think is right. And sometimes it doesn't work, and most of the times you feel that it does. On this occasion, it's worked every single time for him. And he's got them all. He's got the whole squad primed. They're just ready. And there's only Hargreaves who's out long term injury. Everybody else is just all desperate. As you saw from yesterday's game, they're all desperate to be in there. They're all desperate to show they know they're a part of something special this year.
Is Edwin van der Sar going to concede a goal this week? What do you think?
We had a bit of a joke with him after West Ham that he's going to have to let one in soon because they'll have to keep doing post-match interviews with the press. He has to keep coming out and talking about the latest record he's broken.
I think he can get the world record by doing 90 against Fulham, or is that right?
There seems to be a little bit
of
a few other
that.
goalkeepers, I think, have come out of the woodwork from the Belgian league and Egyptian goalkeepers who've got really impressed. I think there is certainly that if you can keep a clean sheet for 64 minutes against Fulham, there's a record he can beat of the former Sevilla goalkeeper, which was sort of earmarked as being a world record. I think there's a few statisticians thumbing through their books at the moment.
If you know better, please send us an email.
If anyone could give me a definitive ahead of Wednesday, that would be great.
Yeah. But I mean, this is a funny thing, isn't it? I mean, this record, we've spoken about it when you were last in a few weeks ago. You know, it's still going on. They're still not conceding a goal in the Premier League. It has become something that the players have even spoken about being in part of their mindset, that they'll happily clear the lines and not think too much about it, just to keep the minutes ticking along. And even Van der Sar said it forms part of his thinking, as that, you know, in a way, once they've got the world record, isn't there a funny part of them that might think, well, let's just finish it now and let's move on, or what? I mean, does it still become a pride issue? What?
I think it is in the back of your mind. It's just something, because you keep seeing it quoted in the press, and they know where the minute is that you get up to, unfortunately, because you got clocks in the stadium. But I think that the players, it's a lot to do with pride. It's nice to make records, but these sort of records, and they are, in this situation, they are putting you on the track to winning trophies. But it really, in the whole picture, it doesn't even come up anywhere near what they need to do. If they concede a goal, it doesn't really matter as long as they go and win the match. The match is the most important thing to do, is to win it. And if they win it 3-1 or they win it 2-1 or whatever, and they've conceded a goal, OK, disappointment is got over very quickly that you haven't set a new record. It doesn't matter. The most important thing is that they win the match. And that's, I'm sure, more than anything, that's what the manager says. Focus on winning the game, on what you need to do to win the game. And if it's to 0, that's great. But if it's not, it doesn't matter, because by having this record doesn't guarantee you winning trophies.
And then get to the 63rd minute with a 0 and start kicking the ball into the stand, and he'll be all right with that.
I was just going to say a word for Nemanja Vidic as well. Edwin van der Sar has deservedly got a lot of praise, but Vidic has been the only ever present in the back four during that run as well, and he's had a phenomenal season at the back for United, because with all of those I think it was sort of 8 or 9 different defensive combinations during that run. You know, you'd expect that Van der Sar hasn't had much to do in the last few weeks. I mean, he keeps keeping clean sheets, but how many saves has he had to make? Not many, and a lot of that is down to what's going on in front of him.
Gents, we're reaching the end of the programme. Just a quick prediction. How many points out of 6 would you anticipate for United this week? 6. Steve?
Yeah, 6.
Really?
Yeah.
OK. And still nils?
Certainly, I think we're due another 0.
It's funny, sure. I think Fulham have had 5 0-0s out of the last 7 away games. There's a little stat for you. OK, that's it for this week. Next week, as well as looking back on those 2 Premier League games, we'll have a bit more looking ahead to that Inter Milan tie. So do join us next week for the United Debate Show.